The life I once had feels like a movie I watched a long time ago, starring someone who just happened to look like me. I see flashes of it, fragmented scenes playing out in my mind when the silence of my small apartment becomes too loud. I see a man in a tailored suit striding through a glass and steel canyon in the heart of the financial district, a leather briefcase in one hand and a phone pressed to his ear, his voice confident as he discusses stock market trends and investment strategies. I see him sitting in a corner office with a panoramic view of the city, the skyline a testament to his ambition. I see him at home, in a sprawling suburban house with a perfectly manicured lawn, laughing with his beautiful wife as they host a dinner party for friends who are just as successful, just as polished. That man was me. And I remember him with a strange mix of pity and disbelief, because I can no longer connect with the person who believed his world was built on a foundation of solid rock. The truth is, it was built on a web of numbers on a screen, on the trust I placed in the wrong people, and it was all swept away by a storm I never saw coming. My world was the world of high finance. I was a senior analyst at a prestigious investment firm, a place where the air itself seemed to crackle with the energy of money being made. My job was to dissect companies, to peer into their financial souls through balance sheets and income statements, and to make recommendations that guided millions of dollars in investments. I was good at it. I had a knack for seeing the patterns, for understanding the subtle language of the market. My life was a reflection of my success. A comfortable home, 2 luxury cars in the garage, a membership at an exclusive golf club, and a wife who was the perfect partner for that life, elegant, intelligent, and socially adept. We were a power couple, a fixture in our community's upper echelon. Our future seemed as secure as a government bond, a steady, upward trajectory of wealth and happiness. The concept of risk management was not just a professional tool for me, it was a personal philosophy. I had the best insurance, a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds, a healthy savings account. I had built a fortress around our lives designed to withstand any market downturn or economic recession. I never imagined that the threat wouldn't come from the outside, but from within the very walls I helped to build. The beginning of the end was innocuous. It started with a new fund, a special project focused on emerging tech startups. It was the brainchild of one of the firm's senior partners, a charismatic and ambitious man I had always admired and respected. He was a mentor to me, the kind of man whose approval I sought. When he asked me to be the lead analyst on the project, I was flattered. It felt like a validation of all my hard work, a ticket to the inner circle. The fund was designed to be aggressive, chasing the high returns promised by disruptive technologies like blockchain and AI-driven platforms. My job was to do the due diligence to vet these startups, to ensure that the astronomical valuations were backed by something more than just hype. I dove into the work with my usual diligence, spending weeks buried in data, interviewing founders, and building complex financial models. I identified several promising companies, but I also flagged a few that looked suspicious. Their financials were opaque, their revenue projections seemed fantastical, and their corporate structures were convoluted, designed, it seemed, to obscure rather than to clarify. I presented my findings to the senior partner, pointing out the red flags, recommending a more cautious approach. I expected a debate, a discussion. Instead, he smiled, patted me on the back, and told me I was being too conservative. "This is the new frontier," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "The old rules don't apply. You need to have vision to see the potential, not just the risk." He told me to refine my models, to reevaluate the data with a more optimistic lens. It was a subtle pressure, couched in the language of mentorship and corporate encouragement, but the message was clear: get on board. And I did. I suppressed my professional instincts, telling myself that he saw something I didn't, that his experience outweighed my caution. I went back to my models and tweaked the assumptions. I gave the questionable startups the benefit of the doubt. I constructed a narrative that justified the investment, a narrative that my boss wanted to hear. That was my first mistake. A small compromise, a tiny crack in my professional integrity, but it was the crack that would eventually bring the entire structure of my life crashing down. The fund launched with great fanfare, attracting a massive influx of capital from our wealthiest clients. For a while, it was a spectacular success. The tech bubble was in full swing, and even the most dubious startups were showing incredible returns on paper. I was hailed as a genius. My bonus that year was larger than my father had earned in a decade of honest, hard work. My wife and I celebrated with a trip to Europe. We drank champagne in Paris and bought expensive watches in Switzerland. We were living the dream. I remember a moment, standing on a balcony overlooking Lake Geneva, my wife in my arms, the setting sun painting the mountains in hues of pink and gold. In that moment, I felt a pang of uneverything, a quiet unease that I couldn't articulate. It was the ghost of my doubt, the memory of those flawed financial models, whispering that this perfect picture was a fragile illusion. I pushed the feeling down, chalking it up to my cautious nature. I had made my bet, and it had paid off. Everything was perfect. But perfection is often a prelude to disaster. I was so focused on the returns, on the numbers going up, that I failed to see the intricate web of deceit being woven around me. I was the face of the fund, the diligent analyst whose reputation gave it credibility. But I was just a pawn in a much larger, much more sinister game. The real financial machinations were happening in the shadows, in offshore accounts and shell corporations I didn't even know existed. I was the perfect cover, a man with an impeccable record and a genuine belief in the work, too busy analyzing the legitimate parts of the portfolio to notice the rot festering beneath the surface. My life's meticulous budget and careful planning were about to become utterly irrelevant. The fortress I had built was about to be breached, not by a frontal assault, but by a quiet betrayal from within. And I, the supposed guardian of the gate, had unknowingly handed the keys to the enemy. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a market crash or a bad earnings report. It was a pair of polite, unassuming men in dark suits who showed up at my office one Tuesday morning. They were from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They told me it was just a routine inquiry, a standard review of the new tech fund's operations. My boss, the senior partner, had assured me it was nothing, just bureaucratic box ticking. He clapped me on the shoulder and told me to cooperate fully, to be transparent. "We have nothing to hide," he said with a confident smile that, in retrospect, was chillingly predatory. So I cooperated. I walked them through my models, explained my due diligence process, and answered their questions with the calm assurance of a man who believed he was on the side of the angels. I gave them everything they asked for: emails, reports, spreadsheets. I was an open book, because I genuinely believed the story written on my pages was one of integrity and professional rigor. The inquiry dragged on for weeks, then months. The polite questions became more pointed, the tone shifting from routine to interrogative. They started asking about specific transactions, about wire transfers to offshore entities I'd never heard of, about meetings I had supposedly attended. They showed me emails with my digital signature on them, authorizing trades and capital allocations that I had no memory of. I stared at the screen, a cold dread creeping up my spine. The emails looked real, the language was my own, the signature was mine, but the content was a fabrication. It was my work, twisted and manipulated to serve a purpose I was only just beginning to grasp. I had been set up. The complex models I had built, the reports I had written, they had been the scaffolding. The real fraud was built around my legitimate work, using my credibility as a foundation. My boss, my mentor, had used my diligence as a shield. While I was focused on the 90% of the fund that was legitimate, he and his inner circle were running a multi-million-dollar shell game with the other 10%. They had created a ghost portfolio within the fund, siphoning off investor capital into their own pockets through a labyrinth of fake startups and fraudulent invoices. And they had used my name, my reputation, to sign off on it all. When I confronted my boss, his calm, reassuring demeanor was gone. The mask slipped, and for the first time I saw the man underneath. He was cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. He didn't deny it. He simply laid out the reality of my situation. My digital signature was on everything. My analysis, however manipulated, had justified the investments. I was the lead analyst. I was the one who had presented the fund to the board. "Who do you think they're going to believe?" he asked, his voice devoid of any emotion. "A senior partner with a 30-year unblemished career, or a junior analyst who got greedy and flew too close to the sun?" He told me to keep my mouth shut, that if I played along, I might walk away with just a slap on the wrist, a suspension. But if I tried to fight, he would bury me. The corporate machine closed ranks with terrifying speed. Suddenly, I was an outcast. Colleagues I had considered friends now avoided my gaze in the hallway. My access to certain files was revoked. I was moved to a small, windowless office in a forgotten corner of the building, a professional leper. The news finally broke, and it was a media firestorm. Massive fraud uncovered at investment giant, the headlines screamed. My name was in every article, my face on every news channel. I was portrayed as the mastermind, the arrogant young analyst who had betrayed his clients' trust for personal gain. They painted a picture of a lavish lifestyle, our home, our cars, our vacations, and presented it not as the fruit of a decade of hard work, but as the spoils of a criminal enterprise. The life I had built was now Exhibit A in the case against me. The legal battle was a nightmare that consumed everything. Our life savings, which I had so carefully accumulated, evaporated in a matter of months, poured into the black hole of legal fees. We sold our cars, cashed in our retirement accounts, took out a second mortgage. The concept of a personal budget became a cruel joke. We were in a fight for my freedom, and the cost was irrelevant until it was all gone. My wife tried to be supportive at first. She stood by my side during the initial press conferences, her hand in mine, a pained smile frozen on her face. But the public pressure was immense and unrelenting. We were pariahs in our own community. Old friends crossed the street to avoid us. Invitations dried up. We were unpersoned. The whispers followed us everywhere, in the grocery store, at the school gates when she picked up our kids. I watched the strain take its toll on her. The sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the shame. She had married a successful, respected man, and now she was married to a public disgrace, a man accused of being a common thief. The foundation of our marriage, which I had thought was love and partnership, turned out to be more fragile. Perhaps it was built on the premise of that successful life, and when the life disappeared, the foundation cracked. The arguments started, quiet and venomous at first, then escalating into raw, painful shouting matches. She accused me of being naive, of being blind, of bringing this ruin upon our family. And the worst part was I knew she was right, at least in part. I had been naive. I had trusted the wrong person. I had compromised my own integrity for the sake of ambition. One evening, after a particularly brutal meeting with my lawyers where they laid out the sheer volume of fabricated evidence against me, I came home to find her packing a suitcase. She didn't cry. Her face was a mask of cold resolve. She told me she couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't live with the shame, the uncertainty. She couldn't subject our children to it. She needed to protect them, and to do that, she needed to get away from me. She said she was taking the children to her parents' house in another state. "It's not a trial separation," she said, her voice flat. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." Just like that. A 15-year relationship, a family, a shared history, all of it terminated like a bad business deal. I didn't beg, I didn't plead. I was too broken. I just stood there in the hallway of the house we could no longer afford, surrounded by the ghosts of our happy life, and watched her walk out the door. She didn't look back. In the span of a few months, I had lost my career, my reputation, and my savings. And now I had lost my family. I was alone, toxic, a man whose name was synonymous with fraud, left to fight a battle I knew I was probably going to lose. After my wife and children left, the house became an echo chamber for my despair. Every room held a memory, a phantom of the life I had so thoroughly destroyed. The silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I was forced to sell the house to cover a fraction of the mounting legal bills. Watching another family's moving truck pull up to the curb of what was once my home was a unique form of torture. I saw a father carry his young daughter across the threshold, just as I had done years ago, and something inside me finally shattered. I had nothing left. The firm had fired me, citing moral turpitude, and my assets were frozen. The friends who had once clapped me on the back at cocktail parties now pretended I didn't exist. My own family, my parents and siblings, were supportive but distant, their love strained by the public shame I had brought upon them. I was radioactive. I moved into a small, bleak apartment in a part of the city I used to fly over in a helicopter on sightseeing tour. My new view was a brick wall. My days became a monotonous cycle of fear and futility. I would spend hours with my legal team, a group of overworked public defenders who seemed to believe in my guilt as much as the prosecution did. I would go over the same falsified documents, the same forged emails, repeating my story until my own voice sounded alien to me. The legal system, I quickly learned, is not about truth. It's about narrative. And the prosecution had a very simple, very compelling narrative, a greedy Wall Street analyst who thought he was smarter than everyone else. My story was complicated, messy, involving sophisticated digital forgeries and a conspiracy orchestrated by powerful men. In the court of public opinion, and increasingly in the court of law, the simple story always wins. I needed to work. The legal bills were a mountain and I had to eat. But my name was poison. Every job application I sent out was met with silence. My face had been on the news. A simple background check would reveal the monstrous fraud I was accused of. Who would hire a man accused of stealing millions of dollars to handle their cash register or stock their shelves? My carefully curated resume, once a passport to any job I wanted, was now a confession. Desperation led me to the underbelly of the economy, the world of cash-in-hand jobs where no one asked for a social security number or a resume. I became a ghost, working in the shadows. I worked as a prep cook in the sweltering, chaotic kitchen of a downtown restaurant, chopping vegetables for 12 hours a day, my hands, which once signed off on multi-million-dollar deals, now raw and calloused. I worked on a construction site, hauling drywall and bags of cement until my back felt like it would snap. I worked as a night shift cleaner in an office building, ironically, not unlike the one where I used to have a corner office. I would empty the trash cans of young, ambitious men and women who looked just like I used to. I would wipe down their expensive desks and clean their keyboards, an invisible phantom in their world of success. The physical exhaustion was a blessing. It quieted my mind. It was hard to ruminate on the injustice of my situation when every muscle in my body was screaming in protest. The pay was barely enough to cover my rent and cheap food, but it was honest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was earning something real, not just manipulating numbers on a screen. This period stripped me down to my core. The tailored suits were replaced by stained t-shirts. The luxury car was replaced by a bus pass. The gourmet meals were replaced by instant noodles and cheap coffee. All the external markers of my identity were gone. The successful analyst, the wealthy husband, the respected member of the community, they had all died. And in their place was just a man. A tired, broken man trying to survive. I learned humility in the kitchens and on the construction sites. I worked alongside people whose daily struggles were far more real than any market fluctuation I had ever worried about. They were worried about paying their rent, about putting food on the table for their kids, about a sick relative's medical bills. They spoke of debt and budgets not as abstract financial concepts, but as a suffocating weight on their chests. They worked hard without complaint and found moments of joy in simple things. A shared joke, a cold beer after a long shift, a phone call from their children. They were kind to me, this quiet, sad man who never spoke about his past. They didn't know who I was and they didn't care. They judged me on my willingness to work, on my reliability, on whether I could be counted on to do my share. In their world, my old life, my old status meant nothing. And in a strange way, that was liberating. I was no longer defined by my spectacular fall, but by the simple act of showing up and doing the work. My lawyer called me one afternoon while I was on my lunch break, sitting on a pile of lumber, eating a sandwich. He told me the prosecution was offering a plea deal. If I pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, they would recommend a significantly reduced sentence. 5 years, maybe less with good behavior. If I went to trial and lost, I was looking at 20. "It's a strong case against you," the lawyer said, his voice weary. "This might be the best you're going to get. It's a pragmatic choice, a good risk management decision." He used my own language against me. I thought about it. 5 years of my life in exchange for an admission of guilt for a crime I didn't commit. An end to the uncertainty, the fight. A clear, if grim, path forward. It was the sensible choice. It was the choice the old me, the analyst who weighed probabilities and outcomes, would have made. But the old me was gone. I looked at my calloused hands covered in sawdust. I thought about the men I worked with who had so little but held onto their dignity with a fierce pride. I thought about my children and what they would one day read about their father. I couldn't let the official record state that I was a thief. I couldn't let the lie become the truth. My name was all I had left. It was tarnished, dragged through the mud, but it was still mine. I told the lawyer to reject the deal. "I'll take my chances," I said. "We're going to trial." I didn't know if it was the bravest or most foolish decision of my life, but I knew it was the only one I could live with. The trial was the most surreal and humiliating experience of my life. I sat in a courtroom day after day, listening to a group of strangers dissect, distort, and ultimately condemn the life I had lived. The prosecution presented their narrative with masterful skill. They used my ambition, my success, and my lifestyle as evidence of a flawed character, a man driven by insatiable greed. My complex financial models were presented as deliberately obtuse tools of deception. My own emails, cleverly edited and taken out of context, were used to paint me as the ringleader. My former boss, the man who had orchestrated the entire scheme, took the stand as the prosecution's star witness. He had been given a generous immunity deal in exchange for his testimony. He looked me in the eye from the witness box and calmly, methodically lied. He painted me as a rogue employee, a brilliant but unstable analyst who had gone behind his back, betraying his trust and the trust of the entire firm. He was believable, charming, and expressed a deep, theatrical sadness over my betrayal. It was a perfect performance. My public defender did his best, but he was outgunned and outmaneuvered. He was a decent man, but he was a general practitioner in a world of specialists. Trying to explain the intricacies of digital forensics and corporate finance to a jury of ordinary citizens was like trying to teach calculus in a foreign language. They saw a man in a cheap suit, accused of stealing millions, and another man in an expensive suit, a pillar of the financial community, pointing the finger. The verdict felt like a foregone conclusion. When the jury foreman stood up and refused to make eye contact with me, I knew. The word guilty echoed in the silent courtroom, but it felt distant, as if it were happening to someone else. I felt a strange, calm wash over me. I had fought. I had told the truth. And I had lost. The system I had once believed in, the one I thought was designed to protect the innocent, had failed. Or perhaps it had worked exactly as it was designed to, protecting the powerful at the expense of the expendable. I was sentenced to 10 years in a medium-security federal prison. The life I knew was officially over. Prison is a place designed to strip you of your identity. You are a number. You wear a uniform. Your days are dictated by bells and routines. The noise is constant, a cacophony of shouts, clanging steel doors, and blaring televisions. Yet in the midst of that chaos, I found a strange kind of solitude. I was no longer the disgraced analyst or the failed husband. I was just another inmate, another man with a past he was trying to forget. I kept to myself, read books from the prison library, and worked in the laundry. The work was monotonous, folding sheets and uniforms for hours on end, but it was a routine, and routine was survival. In the quiet moments in my small cell at night, I would think about my children. I would try to remember the sound of their laughter, the feeling of their small hands in mine. The pain of their absence was a physical ache, a constant companion. My ex-wife did not allow them to visit, and I couldn't blame her. A prison is no place for a child. But she did let them write to me. Their letters, filled with childish drawings and simple stories about school and friends, were my only connection to the world I had lost, the only proof that the man I used to be had ever existed. It was during my 3rd year inside that I received a letter not from my children, but from a young journalist at a small, independent financial news outlet. He had been covering my trial and had always felt that something wasn't right. He had started digging on his own time, long after the mainstream media had moved on. He had found inconsistencies, threads that didn't add up. He wanted to talk to me. At first, I refused. I had no faith left in journalists or in the truth. But he was persistent. He wrote again and again. In his letters, I sensed a genuine hunger for the real story, not the easy narrative. Reluctantly, I agreed to see him. We met in the prison visitation room, a sterile, joyless place. I told him everything, starting from the very beginning. I didn't hold back. I told him about my ambition, my naivete, my compromises. He listened for hours, taking meticulous notes. He came back week after week. He was my only visitor. He became my confessor, my therapist, my last hope. He started his own investigation, using my story as a roadmap. He was a digital native, and he understood the world of data and code in a way my lawyers never had. He uncovered deleted files from the firm's servers. He found a disgruntled IT employee who had been fired shortly after the scandal broke and was willing to talk. He tracked down the complex web of offshore shell corporations, finding a digital money trail that had been expertly hidden. Slowly, piece by painful piece, he uncovered the truth. The story he published was a bombshell. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, laying out the entire conspiracy in intricate, undeniable detail. It proved that my digital signatures had been cloned and that the emails had been inserted into the server after the fact. It showed the clear flow of money from the fund into my former boss's hidden accounts. The story went viral. Other, larger news organizations picked it up. The public narrative, the one that had condemned me, began to crumble. A prominent legal innocence project took up my case. With the new evidence, they filed an appeal. The legal wheels turned slowly, but this time they were turning in my favor. After 5 years, 2 months, and 11 days in prison, my conviction was overturned. I walked out of the prison gates on a sunny afternoon, a free man. I owned nothing but the clothes on my back and a cheap watch the prison gave me. I had no job, no home, no money, but I had my name back. My reputation wasn't restored overnight. The stain of such an accusation never fully washes away. But the truth was out there. The rebuilding process has been slow and difficult. I didn't go back to the world of finance. I had no desire to return to that life. The man who cared about stock prices and investment returns was gone forever. I took a simple job at a local community center, helping people with financial literacy, teaching them how to create a budget, how to avoid predatory loans, how to understand the basics of savings and debt. I was teaching them the real risk management, the kind that matters in everyday life. It doesn't pay much, but it's meaningful work. I'm helping people protect themselves. My ex-wife and I have found a fragile peace. We will never be what we were, too much has been broken. But the anger is gone, replaced by a quiet, sad understanding. She sees me now not as a villain, but as another victim of the same crime. I see my children every other weekend. The first time I saw them after my release, they were strangers. 5 years is a lifetime for a child, but we are slowly, awkwardly getting to know each other again. I am rebuilding my relationship with them, not on a foundation of wealth or success, but on the simple, solid ground of just being their father. My life is small now. I live in a simple apartment. I find joy not in panoramic city views, but in watching my son play soccer, in helping my daughter with her homework, in the quiet satisfaction of a day spent helping others. I lost everything that I thought defined me, my career, my wealth, my status. But in losing it all, I found a more durable, more authentic version of myself. I found that my true value wasn't tied to my net worth, but to my integrity. I have a long way to go, but I am not looking back. The past is a ghost story. My future is an unwritten page, and for the first time in a long, long time, I feel free to write it. That's the story. Now it's your turn to join the conversation. Comment your thoughts and your country, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more episodes like this.